Are electric cars or hydrogen cars the future? Well, in today's video, I'm sharing a discussion that I had on the news forum show called My Generation. We're going to discuss the future of electric cars. Check it out.
Chances are you drive a combustion engine car, or hey, potentially you've spruced up your game to battery power. Combustion was the way of the future. And in Henry Ford's words, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Well, today our horse is combustion, and the future is either batteries, cars that spit out water, flying vehicles, hey, maybe even robo-taxis, and of course the Boring Company, if that's even still a thing. But the conversation tonight centers around the future of transportation. What makes the most sense for our sustainable future while balancing the needs of consumers today? We're discussing specifically the pros and cons to hydrogen cars, EVs, combustion cars, and consumer demand overall. Here to chat with me are some experts on the issue. We have Harry, who's an expert in hydrogen, Valerie, expert in low carbon transmission fuels and electricity system development, Allison, who I would call the mobility nerd, and we have Chris, who is a YouTuber, Cars Unlocked, and a finance/salesman at Nissan. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. This is a really heavy topic, but thanks for taking the task.
No problem. Happy to be here. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to start with some fighting arguments to each of your expertise. And Allison, I'd love to start by throwing it over to you. You know, you're the mobility nerd. I see on your LinkedIn all the time. You're talking a lot about different types of transportation. What are you seeing on the ground level? Where is consumer demand headed, and what's happening right now on the ground?
I think when we think about consumer demand today, we've retrenched a little bit. At the same time, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of what is moving and how. So people are generally, especially in North America, using their personal vehicles. Bike sales and things like that are up, which is great to see. But when we think about movement of goods or services, we're actually seeing some different things happen. So delivery to home is still really big post-pandemic. I think that shifted a lot of the types of trips that people take. And same as we think about potentially services coming to you either at home or work. And that's some of the space that I look at as really interesting as we think about innovation and business models in transportation.
Okay, fascinating. Now, Harry, I want to throw it over to you. You're an expert in hydrogen, and without going too deep, because you're going to lose the audience here, you're too smart for us. Explain to me a fighting argument for why hydrogen could be an option for transportation in the future, because you make some fighting statements here.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I might end up being a bit of the devil's advocate in this show. For me, I work in the hydrogen generation space. So we actually manufacture equipment that makes hydrogen. Hydrogen really is a great molecule when you have no other option. But with a lot of other vehicles and mobility concerns, you have electric and other places. I had a customer tell me a long time ago, the best way to think about it is everything that is gasoline will go electric and everything that's diesel will go to hydrogen. And that's a great way to think about hydrogen and where it fits in the whole mobility landscape.
Right. Now, do you see hydrogen as as something that consumers will latch onto in the near future?
I think it's going to has to start with industry over consumers. Just because, look, we have spent the last 100 years building out the gas network to supply gas everywhere. To realistically expect hydrogen to displace that overnight is crazy, right?
Okay, now, Valerie, I want to throw this over to you because this kind of jumps onto a point that you have an expertise in, but electrification is something that we've seen a huge development in. I mean, Tesla was founded early 2000s. It's taken 20 years, but it seems in the last 5, it's been something that has totally shifted. I mean, the mindset has just shifted with electrification and the expansion of it. Can you just speak on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, it's not just the mindset that's changed, it's become cheaper. The cost of batteries have dropped really much more than anybody thought. And so long as if you're driving a lot, it's cheaper to use an electric vehicle. So that's different than for hydrogen. So it's really taking off. Maybe there'll be some delay here and there for a year or so, but all of the car companies are working on it, and there are many places you can get very low cost electric vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely when you have the scalability of electrification, it kind of mutes the point of hydrogen in this current moment. I want to think, 10, 20 years down the line, but this segment is about what's happening now. Chris, got about 30 seconds here. What do you see on the ground floor when you're talking to 50 people a day at the dealership?
So what I see, mainly the early adoption phase is kind of over. The people who want the latest and greatest things, they've already come for the EVs. Now we're trying to meet the consumers who are kind of skeptical about EVs. They're wondering, how far can I go? Is it going to work? And consumers mainly want convenience. They kind of want what they're used to and what they're accustomed to. And it's hard to convince those kind of skeptics to switch over to EVs.
Well, I mean, you make a fighting chance. I want to jump over to Harry, what you might have to say in a second, but we'll be jumping over to the differences of electric versus hydrogen in the second segment. Stay tuned for that. We'll be right back.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
H2 hydrogen was a test project with the Department of Homeland Security within the United States government. The truck drove a record of 1,806 miles without having to refuel and has the ability to provide 25 kilowatts of export power to support emergency response operations for up to 72 hours without refueling. It's absolutely incredible. Now, on the flip side, electric cars can drive up to 600 miles with next-gen batteries. And while it's not as much, the infrastructure for EVs in Western society seems nearly great. And it's something we'll chat a little bit more about. I mean, of course, if you don't live in Nunavut. But anyways, guys, I'm excited to be chatting with you about this. Valerie, I want to throw it over to you. What's your biggest argument for why electric cars are the car of the future? I mean, obviously, green energy and going towards a more green society is the way that we have to head. But why not a balance of hybrid cars or hydrogen cars? Why electric?
Well, electric, it's cheaper. They really, as you said, have plenty far to go. They get people where they need to go, and they're fun to drive. So people will actually like driving these cars.
Okay, now let me ask you this, though, because I've heard a lot of problems with our electrical grid. I know you're based in the States, but here in Canada, we talk a lot about our electrical grid not being able to handle the amount of power required. It's actually it's an election issue happening right now within the Ontario government is exactly this. They're concerned that we might not be able to provide enough power.
It's not that much power that we need for electric vehicles. When you add in the electric vehicles and the data centers, yeah, it can get big. It can also be a problem if you're trying to power, all of the buses at one particular bus stop. It's a real draw. And then, of course, if you're trying to make hydrogen, that uses a lot of power.
Right. I mean, that's fair. Hydrogen does. Harry, what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason, part of the issue that they're facing is the timing as well. We all want to use renewable electricity, right? The sun is up during the day and down at night. Everyone plugs their cars in at the end of the day. So this is part of the issue that a lot of these power producers are facing, is that the peak production versus the peak consumption are opposite, right? Middle of the day, everyone's at work.
Are you saying this affects electric cars or this affects hydrogen cars?
I'm saying this affects the grid, right? So a lot of the comments that Valerie made was absolutely right in terms of the grid and its appetite to grow and expand. And I think it's going to be a big job as we move forward, but they only have so much room to go, right? When it comes to hydrogen, where hydrogen can play a role in this is as we add more renewable load to the grid, you can actually use that off-peak time to produce hydrogen and then use it to maybe for mobility applications, maybe for chemical applications.
Now, Chris, are electric cars expensive? Like when you're talking to consumers on the ground floor, are they saying, "Oh, I don't want to buy an electric car; it's so expensive"?
Certainly, yeah, they certainly are. And to go off what you said, what consumers don't know is how awesome of a car they are. Like the Audi e-tron was probably one of the funnest cars that I've ever driven or like reviewed, but consumers need to understand that the money that you save is going to compound over time. Yes, they pay a higher upfront cost, and where the education needs to start is how much can they save? When is my break-even point? And that's something that most consumers aren't really aware of when they consider purchasing an EV.
I mean, the Audi starts at like $80,000 to $100,000. I mean, Valerie or Allison, I guess I want to know from you, what do you see from the front of electric car affordability? It just seems like it's still kind of out of the question in some capacity unless you can afford a Tesla.
It's a good question, especially as we think about who the car buying market is. What's interesting now is you actually have some EVs that are coming on the secondary market, either off from a a car rental program or something like that, that's creating affordability at the low end. And yes, Audis are expensive. There are other makers that have less expensive vehicles that are coming in almost at par with new vehicles. We're at a funny time where new vehicles, even ICE, are very expensive.
Now,
So people
I just want to
need
quick
that
jump
help
in.
with that
Yeah.
education.
Like when we look at gasoline powered cars, 1886 was when the first gasoline powered car was created. And then by like 1925 is when they considered it affordable. So if we were to take that ideology with electric cars, why couldn't we take that with hydrogen, Valerie?
So hydrogen cars could be cheaper eventually, but you've got both the hydrogen cars and then you've got to make the hydrogen, which is also these days, especially with electrolysis, not so cheap. So we could hydrogen. I agree with Harry, who said, let's use hydrogen for everything that's currently using diesel. I
Right.
do want to ask him, he said trucks, that's good, and the ships,
I
that's
got to
good.
cut you off here, Valerie. We're gonna jump into our next segment here, but I'll let you finish your thought near the end. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
Back at it, EV sales in Canada are on the rise. In the first 3 quarters of 2024 alone, more zero-emission vehicles, ZEVs, were sold than in all of 2023, a near 40% increase compared to the same period last year. Now, Valerie, I want to throw it over to you. I cut you off on the second segment here, and I want to give you some 10, 15 seconds to finish your thought, so go for it.
Sure. One thought we haven't mentioned at all is, okay, we've talked about cars, we've talked about trucks. What about airplanes? Is that going to be hydrogen? It's my challenge to you, Harry.
Yeah, great question and great comment. The best way to think about where hydrogen makes the most sense is the larger the individual application. So trains, aviations, mining trucks, the big 100-ton mining trucks, the larger it is. Because if you think about trying to electrify that, imagine the battery on a 100-ton mining truck. So large, so much precious material, and very long to charge, right? So that's a great way to think about hydrogen. And personally, I think hydrogen will make its way into the mobility market, but it's easier to start large because I'm producing hydrogen right where I'm consuming a lot of hydrogen, and then it's going to trickle down, hopefully. I'm hoping that somewhere in the middle, hydrogen and EV will meet, but
Well, I guess this is where I jump in too. I mean, H2 hydrogen, when the government put their hard-earned money and time and invested into it, we saw a car or a truck go 1,800 miles. In Canada, that's like what, 2,500 kilometers?
Yeah. I mean, the applications make a ton of sense, but what's happening, similar to an issue that EVs are facing with the grid, hydrogen faces that same issue in terms of where can you get it, right? There isn't hydrogen fueling stations stationed along the 400 series between Toronto and Montreal, and that's where I'd love to see some collaboration from industry if you get a couple of truck companies together or a couple of car companies together to put them down, but it's this chicken or egg. I don't want to buy a car until there's gas stations. I don't want to build a gas station until they're cars.
And I think so. I
think that's where actually it's going to be interesting for hydrogen with these long haul trucking companies because they have the opportunity to invest in that infrastructure, like you talked about.
Yeah.
If a truck company has a fleet of 100 trucks going to very specific locations every day, they know where they could put in that infrastructure. They don't need it at every exit ramp.
Yep.
And that's where I think we're going to see some really interesting adoption, in particular for hydrogen.
Yeah. 100%. But where I find what's happening now is it's a little less sexy, right? The replacing consumer vehicles with hydrogen is awesome. Everyone can see them all over the road. But I talk about a steel facility or a plane or even just a return to base truck. No one sees that, right? It doesn't get you votes, doesn't kind of build you up in the ranks. So this is where I think industry really needs to step up, frankly, and help and get political help as well, because it's not going to be at the forefront on the news, replacing trucks, right? You're better off replacing cars because everyone can see that.
It needs to start on the industrial side.
Exactly, right? Where the money is, and then where's some collaborations.
Chris, do you see from the consumer level, anybody ever bring up hydrogen, like at all?
No.
And let me ask you this. Give me a response on this one. Do people care? Be honest. Do people care about whether or not they drive a combustion, electric, or hydrogen car?
The odd time people have the environment concerns. The main thing that people care about is the financing. And to touch on what Allison said before, like you mentioned, now that time has gone on, there's going to be a lot more pre-owned EVs on the market to be more affordable. Before, nobody wanted a pre-owned EV because they didn't get any government incentives. Those were all on brand new purchases. So now we're hoping to see more sales of pre-owned EVs.
So why not? Like Valerie, I know you're based in the States. I guess I would love that perspective of government incentive programs. The government here in Canada has basically glued transportation to electrification. That it's been like their biggest push. If they were to do the same thing with hydrogen, is hydrogen a possibility?
Yes, hydrogen is a possibility. And in the United States, we do have incentives for hydrogen. And it's not just at our federal government, but also at the state government, where there's been support for manufacturing of hydrogen vehicles. And if you're manufacturing them, well, you sure want to use them.
Allison, what are your thoughts? Like when you talk to people or when you're speaking on stage and you bring up the term hydrogen, is it the same difficulty to understand that as a mode of transportation, just like it was electrification 20 years ago?
So I like when I talk with people about hydrogen, especially engineers, it's like, well, there's so much of the powertrain that's the same. And we all forget about that. The storage becomes necessary. The infrastructure for refueling, recharging becomes necessary, but there's a lot of overlap. They're essentially both electrified platforms. And so that's what gets me excited. You can have a hydrogen vehicle or a battery electric vehicle. They're going to use a lot of the same components. But when we think about hydrogen in application, it's been a lot more in the movement of goods, long haul trucking,
Okay,
port decarb that's been
right.
really
Let's
excited about that.
let's leave it there. We've got our fourth segment coming up. We'll be right back. Thank you.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
As we continue our conversation on the future of transportation, it's inevitable that change will be made. The question lies in what rapid changes will occur. I mean, it took Tesla roughly 20 years to become what it is today. We just only see the last few years. And finally, they're considered the cool and hip car to drive. Electric cars, hydrogen, future shifts in consumer demand, it's all up for debate. So here are our predictions in the future of transportation. So one of the things I wanted to kind of uncover was the mass consumer adoption and what's required for consumers to actually adopt this electrification or hydrogen, or what it took to adopt combustion engine. Allison, I feel you can speak on this pretty well here. What does it take for mass consumer adoption in electrification or even just in hydrogen in general?
The mass consumer adoption, it comes down to affordability, like we've been talking about. Is the vehicle there? And is the infrastructure there? Can I charge my car? Do I need to worry about, am I going to get stranded? And that right now is still true both for electrification and hydrogen. And if we can have both sets of infrastructure out, all the better.
To get to the affordability, all sides of the party need to come in. The government side of things need to work with the manufacturers. It can't be a one-way street. So the lack of now that they got rid of the incentives for EVs, all that needs to kind of mesh and make this kind of perfect format to grow.
I also think specifically for hydrogen, there's an education piece. I mean, you talked a bit earlier about how with electric vehicles, people are still nervous about that range, that range issue. Hydrogen has that same problem where consumers are like, "What do you mean I'm putting a gaseous hydrogen in my car? Isn't that scary? Isn't that dangerous?" Well, the short answer is it's pretty similar to gasoline. You know, if you have enough of a problem that the whole thing, you crash your car, it might be an issue, but it's not any that much worse. It's pretty much on par, right? And so there's an education piece from the consumer side that also needs to occur.
Valerie, I'm curious, when we talked about long form transportation, so I guess like trucking as an example in logistics, do you think electrification or hydrogen is going to be the future of that industry?
I think it's going to be a combo. I think for the long haul trucking, hydrogen is the way to go.
Yeah.
But then you've got, the distribution and getting it down the little road. And so there could be some more common change from your hydrogen truck that gets it across the country, across the continent, and then smaller electric trucks to do delivery.
Interesting.
Or
And-
drones.
Or drones.
Or drones,
Yeah.
you know, and coming on that mobility trend, like ports and airports are great applications for hydrogen, right? And people don't realize, global shipping accounts for somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, right? And you have a port on one end and a port on another end. Well, that's the infrastructure you need to build, right?
So you're saying we put the hydrogen refueling stations at, you know, the points at which they stop, or you could put them at the Huskies in Canada here, where they're along the highway. You just throw them on all the Huskies or whatever it might be. Chris, I'm curious: do people buy ZEVs or electric cars because of government incentives? Like, is that something that's talked about?
It's something that attracts them and gets the conversation started when they see it on the news or they hear about a big rebate. It's something that kind of gets them started. But when they see it on the news that the rebate is gone, then that kind of leaves their mind, and then they start thinking alternatives. But what most people don't know is a lot of the manufacturers have matched the government incentives to sell all the EVs they build. But that's why I feel it needs to all just become a lovely kind of
Is it just an economic decision that's kind of driving this, or are you seeing consumers as well come with like, I want to save the climate or help the climate?
It's more so a financial decision versus environmental.
Yeah. And I feel like that's pretty, I don't know, I feel like that'd be pretty common with that. It's like, yes, people care, but they also care about their bank account.
Yeah.
That's just an individual. I mean, okay, so Allison, I wanted to throw this over to you. You're the mobility nerd. You speak to a lot of different people. We've got experts on this show on consumer demand and hydrogen and electrification. From your standpoint, do you feel that hydrogen and electrification will be a equal hybrid in the next 20, 30 years? What's your prediction? You've got about 20 seconds here.
Yeah, I think they are going to be equal. And I think for every reason that we've talked about, the batteries that would be required for a giant truck, like a tractor trailer, it's just so much use of material. It really is a good application of hydrogen. Or we're going to see rethinking of how we actually propel those types of systems. And that could open up to more batteries.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining me. I appreciate it. I wish we had more time. Thank you. We most definitely want to hear from you, especially if you disagreed or feel we missed something important. Have something to say? Join the conversation on My Generation on all social media platforms. We'll end off with this. Do not simply accept what you are told. Challenge your thinking, engage in differences, and please, try to listen to new perspectives. Have a great night. Enjoy.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you stayed until the end, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up on the video, and make sure you comment. What do you think the future of electric cars is? Is it going to be hydrogen? Is it going to be EV? Or is it going to be gas for the foreseeable future? We'd love to hear your comments. Thank you again for watching, and thank you to the My Generation Show for having me on. We will see you in the next video.